Alrighty, so I chose to do my report over here on the reading zone. And what the reading zone basically is about is it's going to be giving us guidelines, giving us tips, and talking about, get um, how to get young students to, find their love of reading and find their reading zone. So, the problem that the book is addressing is that students are often uninterested in reading. I find that this is still true. I mean, I guess it depends on the area in which you are teaching, but especially in areas where, uh, your Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not met. I mean, a lot of times you're going to find uninterested students in reading, and they don't want to do it, and certainly are not getting lost in their books. Many teachers struggle with this because reading is such an important part of not only a student's life but their schooling. I mean, you're going to find that you have to read throughout your entire school career, and depending on what career you go into or they choose to go into, you're still going to find that you have to read, reports or articles or things that are going to help you in your career. So the problem is, what can teachers do to help this issue? How is it possible to have entire classrooms that not only read but enjoy it? That was kind of a question that I came up with. How do you have your entire classroom? Because in some classrooms you have maybe one or two students that enjoy reading, but how do you have entire classrooms that enjoy it? So this is a quote I pulled straight from the book. So, more important, she offers expert, practical, and oh such sane advice for inviting students to feel the rapture of the deep, to enter their own reading zones, becoming the kind of readers we all envy. So some questions that I had thought about before I went into reading is why is reading so important in school? How is it possible to encourage reading and teach students to enjoy it as well? Can't just reading at home solve this problem. So if, can't students reading at home just be able to solve the issue of loving reading? And what can I do as a teacher to encourage this love of reading in my students? And I included this little graph, these little statistics here that I found. Says, why can't I skip my 20 minutes of reading tonight? And so that's something to look at as well, that kind of gives you, why students should be reading at home. I just thought it was pretty interesting. So the purpose in this book is that the author, Nancy Atwell, makes her case and gives guidelines and personal experience from using reading workshops in her classes. These reading workshops are what is helping her students to learn to love reading. So that's basically what the book is about. She's going to be giving guidelines and giving, talking about her personal experiences from her reading workshops, all the mistakes that she made, and how she fixed them. I chose to present this book because I am personally intrigued with encouraging a love for reading in my students. I was a student in school who did not like reading at all. Every time I was told that I had to read a book or do a book report, I absolutely did not enjoy it. And I always chose either the easiest book, or I chose a book and then looked at the notes instead of reading it. And I just absolutely despise having to read. And I wanted to learn how to help encourage a love for reading in my future students. So let's start. I'm just going to give a brief overview of each of the chapters, just real quick. So chapter 1, the personal art. The goal is for every child to become a skilled, passionate, habitual, critical reader. Personal preference is the foundation for anyone who will make a reading a personal art. And then this is a quote: abandoning a book that a reader isn't enjoying is viewed as a smart move and not a character defect. And that's something that kind of intrigued me, because I had always thought about, if you didn't like the book that you were told to read, or didn't like the book that you chose, like, you just were not a good reader in general. Chapter 2, reading in the zone. How do we get students in the reading zone? That's kind of what the chapter is covering. The need for quiet is important for readers. So, not having distractions and giving them an area to read, not putting pressure on reading. And what the chapter meant by this is they talk a lot about not having things connected to pleasure of reading, like having tests and or not giving incentives for reading a certain amount of books. Allow students to skim, choose a different book if they like to, and choose one that they like, most importantly. Okay, so chapter 3, choice. So kids choose what they read because children who choose books are more likely to grow up to become adults who read books. And, I find that that's pretty interesting as well, given that if you are able to choose a book that you enjoy, you will turn out to choose more books as you get older, which I like. I kind of wish that I had done that in school myself. The most surefire way to induce a love of books in students is by letting them choose what to love. So not forcing them to read, a book about, say, roller coasters when the student likes books about flowers. Like those are two completely different topics, and, most likely the student would not enjoy that. At the beginning of the year, reading surveys should be used to determine who they are as readers. And I fully enjoy this, just because, I feel like knowing your students is going to help you learn how to encourage your students. If you don't know what makes your students tick or what your students enjoy, how are you to encourage that love of reading? Chapter 4, ease. The bottom line requirement is an inviting classroom library. So having a lot of different books, not just one type of book, not just one genre, having a multitude of books in your library. But avoiding things like the Guinness Book of World Records, comic books, teen celebrity bios, things that really aren't going to teach your students about reading and teaching them to love reading. They're just kind of like more entertaining and not really informational, gonna make their vocabulary larger type books. To make home reading easier, do not assign busy work in connection with the pleasure of books. This goes back to, kind of what we talked about with chapter 2 with not putting pressure on reading. Okay, so chapter 5 was about comprehension, and basically that was just about how she went through teaching her the reading comprehension strategies to her students, and she found a lot of that they can kind of activate these strategies themselves when they are reading things that they enjoy. Chapter 6, book talking, and this was about having group discussions on the contents of chosen books, and a lot of the time she groups certain genres of books together so that they can kind of see the similarities in the genres and also differences in different genres. And she talked about having book talks about older books or newer books and just kind of feeling out what students want to read and helping them and letting them talk about books they're reading so that they can help solve internal questions and encourage others to read the same thing. Chapter 7 is about one-to-one, and what this is just how she's using a method to check the progress of her readers. So what she uses are letter essays is what she called them. And they are between her and her students, where they would kind of give a mini book report. A kind of mini book report. They would give a rundown of the books they have finished, and she would kind of ask any questions that they have, and she would write a letter back to them. So I really like that one-to-one, because you're kind of you're not in their face, you're allowing them to put their thoughts on paper, which I really enjoy. Chapter 8 was about boys. Now, I didn't really enjoy this chapter just because it kind of was redundant to me, but what she talked about was that there are so many stereotypes that affect how boys read, and she gave a list of all the stereotypes that are associated with boys reading, and one of them is that many think boys are too rambunctious or distracted to enjoy reading, and then she kind of goes on to kind of say that it's untrue and that the freedom of choice has a positive effect on both boys and girls reading, meaning, if you let boys choose what they're going to read about, they're a lot more likely to enjoy reading as well. I don't know. It just, that whole chapter I didn't really enjoy because it was a little bit redundant, but I felt that it also, I guess she felt that it needed to be added in there. So chapter 9, high school, and she in this chapter is kind of talking about how when students get to high school, they tend to lose their reading interest and read what is assigned instead. I think she did. She checked back in with one of her former students and found that they had gone from reading so many books to reading maybe like 2 or 3, and most of them were assigned to them. So in this chapter, the author is urging high school teachers to ensure the readers are reading for pleasure still and allowing some choice of freedom in classes, which I know can be difficult because when you're in, elementary school, you're in one class all day, so it's a lot easier for the teacher to make time for reading. But when you get to like middle school and high school, it becomes a little bit more difficult because you're in different classes for a certain amount of time. So chapter 10, the last chapter, is about practicalities, and what she talks a lot about is time. And what she discusses is that she has a set schedule during her reading workshops. She has like 15-minute intervals or 20-minute intervals. I think she had set aside 85 minutes for this like reading workshop schedule, and she said that it works really well for young students because they tend to have, short attention spans. So also having reading guidelines keeps the students on track for their reading workshop. So some assumptions that it seemed that the author had made is that the child will simply fall in love with reading if her methods are followed to a T. And my issue with this is that she's not really addressing what can be done for students who show a complete annoyance with reading. So like if a student is completely against reading altogether, won't even go pick out a book, doesn't care what they like, how are you to solve that? She didn't really go over that in the book. I'm assuming that by having a ton of different books in my library and by doing book talks and following these methods, I will scarcely run into a student who is against the reading still. Now, I don't believe that I will never run into this problem, but again, I just wish the author would have addressed that in her book. She didn't really address those kinds of issues. Follow-up question. So what is the point of view of the author? The point of view is that it's pretty much summarized by one word, choice. And she went over that throughout the entire book, and every chapter she went back to that, it seems. So I also believe that choice is needed to encourage students to enjoy reading. However, I feel like much more is needed than just freedom of choice. How are students expected to handle reading things they do not enjoy? She didn't go over that pretty much all. How are they supposed to handle reading, having to read textbooks when they get to high school? I know they're not supposed to enjoy it, but is her method of reading workshops, is that just going to, make them be able to understand and be able to easily read textbooks? She didn't really go over that issue. And, is the point of the reading zone simply to get students reading and not to address any other reading issues they may run into? So that was kind of something I thought about after reading the text. So my conclusions on the book is that I love the methods that the author gives in order to help guide students to enter their reading zone. I just wish she would have addressed more difficulties surrounding reading in school, not so much love for reading. But as far as being informational and how to set up and conduct a reading workshop, I find that this book is going to be really helpful for me professionally. I can almost guarantee that I will be revisiting it in the future because the way that she had kind of set up her reading workshop in the book made a lot of sense to me, and it had some pretty good evidence surrounding it. She used a lot of student cases, which I enjoyed reading about. But yeah, thanks for listening to my book, and I hope at least someone will check it out. I mean, I really liked it. It's not a crazy, confusing book. It's actually a really informational book. I just had maybe a couple issues with it. But thanks, everyone.